Hello everybody, Teri here from Renegade Game Studios. We're painting up Rita today. I'm really excited. Hello to everyone in chat. I know there's folks out there. Please drop by, say hi. I want to say hi to you too, so stop by and say hi in chat. We are broadcasting on a number of platforms. If you're seeing me on Facebook, hello. If you're seeing me on Twitch, howdy. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, either live or say on the video on demand, hello. Be sure to join us. We're live doing Power Ranger stuff every Monday. I'm ready to get going, so if you're there, oh, Desiree is in chat, as is Victoria. She's modding across all of our platforms. Hello, Dark Moon. I have been doing well, thank you for asking. I'm doing okay, actually. I'm gonna let you know now, I didn't have time to bandage my hand, so if you see the little mark on my painting hand, I got in a fight with my stove this weekend, but I won. You should see the other guy. Don't worry about that. I'm really thrilled to be getting Rita finished. There's nothing that feels as good as finishing a project, and so we're gonna get her done today. In terms of tools, I've got my regular set of brushes. I've talked about this in the past. Ooh, I should turn that off. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. And in terms of our brushes, we have a detail brush, which is really important for getting those fine details. We have a dry brush. So here's my big old dry brush. I've got a couple of them actually because I love them. So dry brushing, get a big old brush. We want to use a detail brush to get all the fiddly little details, and a nice base coat brush. These three brushes will do you well. The dry brushes don't spend a lot of money on because they're very expensive, or if they are expensive, I should say, they get ruined really fast. There's really hard technique on brushes, so like get the cheapo stuff. I use cheap makeup brushes. These are like dollar store or drugstore quality, like $3, $4 brushes. For your detail brush, for your base coat brush, you can get art brushes, watercolor brushes. You can spend a little bit more money on them, but if use whatever brushes you have on hand, honestly. As you learn and grow, you'll figure out where the limitations of your tools are. So if you're starting out brand new, it's really important to just get painting, because that will give you the knowledge you need to figure out what tools you're finding are making things harder for you, and where you should invest a little bit of money, and if you're going to keep going with it too. And it's a good way to figure out if this is something you really want to pursue. So, I also wanted to talk real quick. As usual, I have my wet palette, which is a little plastic container with wet paper towel underneath and a sheet of baking parchment. I also have some, these dollar store palettes, like well palettes here. I'm going to use these as my dry brush palettes as well. You don't have to spend too much. You can also use any little plastic, disposable thing that you've got. I've used margarine containers on these streams. I've used in the past lids to coffee tins, so those work really well as well. It just makes it easier on yourself. And yeah, there's a little bit left on Rita that we're gonna tackle today. We're gonna spend a little time working up some of the highlights on her. She's showing up a little dark on camera too. Let me see if I can brighten it up a little bit for you. There we go. I don't want to wash her out too much. But you can see after we let that wash dry, it's kind of settled into the cracks and crevices a bit, and you've got this nice shadow. Now you can leave the cloth like that. You can highlight it up even more if you really want to bring out those creases. We might see if we get there, but first, before we go back in and mess with the details, we want to get her to a place where we're done, where all the base coats are done, all the color blocking is done, and we're happy with the way she looks. So we're gonna get right on that. I did want to mention too, though, I talk about letting your wet palette dry, and with the parchment paper, I let mine dry. And for those of you who have tuned in the past, we talked a little bit about like keeping a painting diary. If you let your wet palette parchment dry, you can actually write on it and do color matching off of it for future work. So I've got my little wet palette from yesterday, where I wrote on it after it dried, and all the paints are dry, all the paint colors I used on the model. So if I want to go back and refer to it, if I want to try to match something on it in the future, I know what colors I've used. I know a little bit by eye what they look like on the palette, dry. And it's a little bit easier to match that way too. So it's a nice way to start, like a recipe book for all of your models. If you want to build something up like this for a set of models that you really like the way you did the blue on a particular model, let's say, and you want to replicate it. Like you painted, say, the Mighty Morphin Blue Ranger, you love the way the blue looks, you think it's great, you'll let that palette paper dry. You can then refer to it later if you want to do the blue for the Zeo Ranger or the Hyperforce blue in that same way. You have a good idea by eye with the paint colors how you do that, and you're ready to go. All right, so let's get rolling here. So Rita here has a few things that we've got to get done. We've got to get the little bustle on the back done. We've got her staff we've got to finish off. We'll color block that out, as well as I think that sphere is red. I'm pretty sure. Let me know, chat. And we can do some fun glowy spherical like reflection effects on it. We can also brighten up some of that gold a little bit. I'm going to show you a little trick I've been using recently. I haven't made a video on it or done anything publicly with it, so this is like the first time the world's going to see what I do to kind of bring up the golds a little bit with some new paints that I'm going to show you today. So let's get rolling here. I think what I want to start on is that back bustle first, which is mostly white, but I don't want to leave it just white. So we're gonna do some fun stuff with it. I'm gonna put some white on my palette. This is golden fluid acrylic white. It's just a couple drops. You don't need a lot on your palette, on your wet palette. Now, when you start painting on a wet palette, the paints will actually, especially if your paints are new, they're a little bit thinner. They haven't, dried down a little bit. They haven't gotten kind of concentrated. So usually I don't bring too much water from my painting cup onto my palette. So I'll just add a little bit of water onto my brush just to hydrate it. And what colors do I want to mix with this to get that bustle going? I think to tie it with the feathers a little bit, I'm going to add some of the blue that I'm going to use on the feathers. So this is a rebottled old Signar blue base. I put it in one of these twist cap bottles because I exploded my pot. And I'm just going to give this a shake, actually. It's settled a little bit. And put a couple drops on the palette. So it should come out a little bit creamy. Yeah, there we go. And just a drop. It's not a lot. It looks like a lot on the palette, but these paints go a long way because they're so concentrated and you're painting just a little bit. Hello, Delton. Hi. Thanks for stopping by. I'm so glad to see you. All right. So Dark Moon is working on their Green Ranger and Bulk and Skull, which is awesome. Those are really fun models to make. Bulk and Skull especially are really fun. They're the purple and orange of those minis. I think I've got a close one here. Yeah, the purple and orange of the minis gives you a really fun like color palette to play with in Power Rangers that you don't really get a chance to play with. So and getting them worked up. And then he's doing the red armored rangers, which is really fun. So hi, thanks for stopping by, everyone. And let's blend these two colors together. So I'm going to take a little bit of the white. Now when I blend whites with other things, I try, ideally the goal is to work with the white first and pull your white paint first and then pull your other color because you're less likely to contaminate that. So if you want to use that white for other things, you can. So pull from the lightest color first and then pull from your darker color. And this blue too, because I know I'm going to mix and continue to blend with it for the feathers. I'm okay with getting a little bit of white in there because I know that color is going to be the going into that lighter white color, whereas I'm not necessarily going to blend all of my white into the blue. We might come back to that a little bit more, and I'm going to probably add more white to this as we go. This is kind of like a wet layer first. I want coverage, so I'm not thinning this out too much. About the consistency of heavy cream or whipping cream, even though it's pretty thick for paint, but I'm not too worried because I'm pretty sure as I apply it, and I'm going to apply it fairly thin, it will go on nice. Now, as we paint, the only parts I'm going to be really fussy about is this brown already. Because I painted all of the other areas around it. This is the stage where you want to be careful. I did overpaint the borders of brown, so let me show you up close here just how overpainted this bustle is in terms of its border. So there's brown on quite a bit of it. So what I'm trying to apply is I'm going to apply the blue onto where it belongs, because the brown will kind of hide where those lines marry. If I was going to try to leave that line perfect, the black might peek through, or I might end up getting blue on the brown, which is not ideal. So I'm going to get that blue onto this bustle right now. I'm going to go slow. We're going to take our time as we do this. It's not a race. Painting is not a race. So take your time, spend the time to, like, you know, get it done looking the way you want. Now I'm using this blue as an undertone, but I'm probably going to bring this up to quite white. That's fine. I might come in, and I'm thinking aloud here. I could do this one of two ways. One, I could try to dry brush the white on most of it and then clean it up with a little brush later on. The only risk is that I might hit some of the brown, and that brown might end up picking up some of the white that I dry brush on. In which case it's just a touch up. It's not the end of the world. So if that's the way I go, it'll go really fast once this base coat is done. The other thing I can do is I could probably hand pick out and do kind of this flat wet brushing technique that is it has the application methodology of a dry brush, but you're using wet paint, and it lets you control the paint a little bit more when it comes to how you apply it, because it's not a big brush going everywhere. So I can use my base coat brush to kind of do it that way. That technique I think I'm going to try that. We'll try it and we'll see how it looks. Because then we can wash down the darker shaded areas a little bit afterwards and just pick them out again if we need to. I think that might be the way we go. That technique relies on us using the side of our brush. Now, when we use the side of our brush, I know I talked about this before, but there are different ways to use the brush. So right now I'm painting with the tip of my brush to try to get that paint deposited more into the cracks and crevices of this model. So I'm using the tip to kind of push the paint and apply the paint into those cracks and those kind of fiddly areas that letting the brush that leveraging the tip of the brush really makes it easy to do. When we paint up the high points of this brush, instead of using the tip of the brush, we'll probably use the side of the brush. I'm going to actually show you right now with this blue on black, because it'll make it easier to kind of demonstrate this technique, because it'll be easier to see on camera here. So I'm going to use the side of my brush. So instead of pointing the tip of my brush into the area, I'm just going to bring the side of the brush down the model like this. And you can kind of see how it picks up on those raised areas of the model really easily. It's not a hard way to get those on these really beautifully sculpted, deeply detailed models with this big beefy scale. Using the side of your brush to pick up those details is really easy. So that's something that we really want to, we can take advantage of. So using the different sides and points and areas of your brush to paint different techniques is a really great way to kind of improve your repertoire without buying new brushes. You don't need a different brush to get this technique. So you can kind of get a little more versatility out of your brush by leveraging it more. So we're going to just keep on painting this base coat on, and then we'll come back at it with a little bit of white and highlight those up that way. Let me know in chat, what have you been working on? Dark Moon on Twitch has been letting us know. Let's see. Had trouble with the skull exposed boxers and had to do toner on them. Oh man, that's rough. I mean, I think that to figure out, the process of painting sometimes things just don't look right. It takes a little bit of experimentation to figure out how to get the right effect. And sometimes you just have to give it a wash, or sometimes you have to dry brush it and start over again. Sometimes you just have to I'm just going to rebase the whole thing and I'm going to try it again. That's fine. That's part of the joy in the process, right? If you're into painting miniatures, you'll realize very quickly that it's more about that process and that journey, and you can get a lot of satisfaction from figuring out how to do something new and how to make something look the way you want it to look. It's that problem solving part. It's really satisfying. It's just as satisfying, I feel, as getting a project done, right? Like those are the little victories on the journey, and being able to take that moment and enjoy like getting it right is also as much a part of the process as finishing the model. Don't just focus on the goal. Enjoy the whole experience of miniature painting. Now, if you are a part of the Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid group, you'll be aware that we've been doing some fun stuff in the group, including talking a little bit about some new expansions coming for the game. Now, I'll let you know now that next week I will not be painting because I've roped Scott in to chat with all of you Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid fans about some of those expansions. So it's going to be really fun. I think it's going to be a really great time. So we won't be painting next week, but I do hope you still hang out and join us in the Renegade Painters group, which you can also find on Facebook. Just do a quick search, Renegade Painters, just like on the bottom of the screen right there. We are still having Tony, our awesome community member who has been hosting our live painting hangouts, will be there. I'm going to try to stop in this weekend and say hi to everyone. So if you're working on stuff, I've been seeing some really great miniatures coming out of our groups there too, so it's pretty awesome. Hello Steven, hello Alan, hello Mike. Thanks for stopping by, and thank you Kevin. Holy smokes, that's a really nice compliment. I wouldn't say I'm a great painter. I would say that I am an experienced painter, but I'm also, it's a secret, but I'm a bit of a lazy painter. So I'm not necessarily someone who is interested in spending so much time that if my models hit the ground, I can't finish the game I was playing with. I remember I keep in mind as I paint my miniatures that these are game pieces. So I'm going to be using these. I'm going to be handling these. These are going to get transported. So I paint to a quality that makes me happy, and I hope everyone does. I think that's the most important part. You want to paint for you. You don't want to try to compare your painting to anyone else. You want to paint in a way that makes you happy, and that's hopefully what you're taking away from all of these painting sessions we've been doing together, is that these are some tips to help you find your journey and be on your path, but really I think that you can do this. This isn't that hard. But this is something that you can develop over time. And again, I really want to emphasize that if you're new to painting, take care of yourself in the process, right? It takes a little bit of time to develop the fine motor control of your muscles, especially for muscles you don't necessarily use all the time. And I think I see a lot of people who say, hey, I've got really shaky hands. For example, that's one of the biggest things I hear. So the person who introduced me to miniatures, the person who I ended up marrying, my partner in crime, he's a big guy, 6'4". He's got big ham hands. His hands shake. They have always shook. He's the one who introduced me to painting miniatures. He's a great painter, and his hands shake too. There are ways to help the shaking. And so if that's the thing that's keeping you from getting paint on your miniatures, you can absolutely, first of all, these miniatures are really forgiving because the scale is so much bigger. So if you're intimidated by the idea of painting miniatures, you can go really far with basic techniques and big brushes like dry brushing and washing, and take that to get a lot of paint on miniatures. And it doesn't matter if your hands shake. The other thing you can do is you can press your palms together and hold your miniature by pressing those palms together in a way so that even if your hands shake, your hands will shake together. And when you shake this way, the miniature and the brush are kind of married and they're shaking at the same time. So it's like having a stabilizing effect, and it mitigates that. So don't worry about shaky hands. You can still do this. Don't let that be a barrier to getting paint on your miniatures or trying. These again, as I've said before, these are really forgiving miniatures because of their scale. There's big, bold details. It's easy to paint. It's like coloring in a coloring book. And except unlike a coloring book, paint is its own whiteout. So you can be really messy as you go and you start and you get going, and then as you paint on the finer details, you can take your little bit of time and get them done. And because they're three-dimensional, the harder parts to reach on a miniature are the ones nobody sees. So there's also that. You can cheat a little bit. There's a little more cheating. It's not, everything isn't exposed. So focus on the stuff that you can see and you know, give it a go. You'll be surprised how much you can impress yourself. So that blue is done. I'm going to let that dry there. This is a pretty thick, concentrated paint coat. Just because I wanted to get coverage on there. It's not perfect by any means. This isn't like a full-on paint coat. I'm probably going to have to do some touch-ups in terms of the color, but I'm pretty happy with it as a base coat. And then I'm going to come in and do a second coat as that, once that is dry. All right, so what else do we have here? I'm going to stick Rita on a base here just so that I can not hold her. So these are little holders. This one is by Citadel. You don't need them. You can use some poster tack or rubber bands or a little bit of hot glue. I've done that before. And stick your miniature like on an upside down glass or a mason jar or a little pill bottle, depending on the base size, to work like this. But it just keeps my fingers from grabbing onto the miniature where the paint is wet. And so that's why I'm going to stick her on the base now. Nerds of the One. Wine cork with some putty to hold it. That also works really well. Wine cork is an underrated hobby tool. I think that cork as a whole is one of those products that can be used for texturing bases. Like if you break it up or scratch it up a little bit, give it some rugged edges, you can glue models onto it as on the base, and you have a really cool texture that you can then paint. You can use it as a base for as a holder if you're using a wine cork. Again, these bases are pretty sizable though. This is like I want to say it's like 40 millimeters, this circle base here. So it's pretty sizable, and wine corks tend to be a little bit smaller, but for something like the putties that are much smaller bases, they're great for that too. Nice way to hold things, especially with the putties. Again, if you're putting washes on them, you don't want to handle them while they're wet. That wine, like the wine cork, is a really great way to go. And also, if you're someone with shaky hands too, a holder can make things easier to hold. If you're struggling with your manual dexterity in your hands, and a lot of people do, a holder can be really useful. So you don't have to spend a ton of money on it. It can be made up of, I've seen people use these paint bottles even. You just stick some poster tack on it, put your model on top of it, and it's a nice way to stabilize, and you've also got a nice holder that isn't like this thin rimmed, base here that can be kind of easy to slip out. Chris, thanks for stopping by. Hello. Yes, my family is doing well. I hope everyone's family is doing okay and you're all well and safe out there. Any questions while we're going? Thanks for stopping by, Dark Moon. But let's get the blue on the feathers going. Since we do have some of this blue base mixed in, I'm gonna add a little bit of water. Again, I gave my brush a little bit of a wash. I try to wash it about as like every 2 to 3 times I load it. If it's a big brush like this, if it's a thinner brush, I try to give it a rinse and then reload my paint that way, just because what you're trying to do is keep the brush hydrated, because if you keep the brush hydrated, that water in the brush will actually help you maintain the point. Painting with a dry brush, unless you're dry brushing, it makes it hard to control. It's harder to control the paint on your brush when it is dry than when it is wet. So you can, again, I've talked about this in the past. If you want, one way to help shape the point is give it a rinse in water, and then take off the excess water on like a dry paper towel, and then on your palette paper towel, bring your brush across your palette paper towel and give it a spin, and that will help give you a nice sharp point on the brush. And that just is a nice easy way to keep your brush both hydrated and keep it pointed so you can keep going. Let's get that blue on there. I think I'm gonna go with a little bit of a darker blue here. I'm gonna take some of that blue that's kind of on my palette already and mix that in until I have a consistency. It's gonna be a little bit thinner. I'm painting on the feathers on her frill now. It's gonna be a little bit darker, but that's okay. I can use that. I'm gonna rinse my brush before I go into my white, and then I'll pull a little bit of white out here, and I won't use as much. So usually with these lighter colors, a little bit of dark color will go a long way in a lighter color. So something like white, if you're adding even a little bit to your palette, a little bit of blue will go a long way to and overpower that white really fast. And a little bit of black, similarly, will go a long way into any color you go. So you don't need a ton of it. And I'm going to add that in, and it's a little thin. I'm going to see how it looks on my miniature and then decide if that's fine. And I think that coverage is looking okay. It might dry down a little bit because it is pretty diluted. Might dry down a little bit, but I'm okay with how that looks right now. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that onto my miniature here. Now, if you are paying a little bit of attention to where the paint is on my brush, I'm really working hard as I load my brush, as I mix my paint on my palette with my brush, to try to keep that paint away from this area here up by the metal part called the ferrule. I mentioned this before last week, but again, if paint dries up in that ferrule, it tends to splay the bristles inside. If it gets up there and it dries, it's harder to keep the point on your brush. So you don't want to do that. It's one of the reasons why you want to rinse your brush fairly often. You don't want paint to kind of eventually get up into that area. So rinsing your brush often is a good way to prevent that and keep your brushes in good quality and good status, like good maintenance. So rinsing your brush is a good habit, not just because it helps you control the bristles of the brush, but also because it keeps your brush lasting longer. So the more you spend on taking care of your brushes, the less you actually have to buy new ones. This is a brush that I have taken with me for years, so I'm pretty happy with it. I don't want to lose it right away. And you can make your brushes last years even if you're painting with them. I paint quite often, so just enjoy taking care of your brushes as part of the process. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be like this super extreme thing. It can just be like, hey, every once in a while I will just rinse my brush while I'm painting with it. I'll make sure at the end of a session there's no paint in my brush at all. I'll give it a good rinse through. And if you want to go even more, if you want to go deep cleaning and that sort of thing, if you're not, you don't have to buy new products for that either. You can take some shampoo. You probably have some of that at home, and give a little bit of shampoo into your bristles, especially if they're natural, and then do the same with some conditioner. I'll take a little bit of conditioner, I'll put it in my bristles, especially if it's natural fiber, if it's a natural hair brush, and I'll take a little bit of conditioner into it, and it'll help maintain that brush. And if you let a little bit of conditioner dry into that brush, you can shape it and then let it dry. It'll help maintain that point of the brush, and then give your brush a good rinse before you start painting again. You're good to go. All right, let's see here. Who else is in chat today? Are you hanging out? Are you painting along? Let me know what you're doing while you're chilling out with us on stream today. I'd love to see what you're up to. Have you been watching anything? Any Power Rangers episodes on Netflix? I know they have like basically all the episodes in the US and Canada for Power Rangers. So if you've been catching up on any Power Rangers or doing any rewatches, I'd love to know in chat there. Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Ryan has been one of the people who's been posting stuff in our Renegade Painters group. And by the way, Ryan, you've been doing a fantastic job. I love seeing your stuff. One thing that always causes me the most grief is faces like Rita and Scorpina. So I've done 2 faces on these streams in the past. You can always check those streams, but my tips generally for faces are, especially like feminine faces, is I have a little tip for painting eyes, and that's to overpaint the eye, paint the pupil in, and then clean up with flesh on the top and bottom of the face eyes with a nice detail brush. A detail brush is going to give you a little bit of extra oomph if you want to do like the details, like two-tone eyes on the face. The other thing you can do with faces, and this is something I've done for years, I've done it on other miniatures, lots of like if you have like a big army of, say, infantry miniatures, all of them with faces, you can just paint the face on and then hit it with a wash, and it just naturally adds shadow and shade where they would be, and it totally works for tabletop quality. Like if my table's shaking, sorry. It totally works for tabletop quality, and that helps with getting the details on the face, like the eye sockets and the lips. You'll see them pop on the miniature, but they don't have to be like painted on. Again, these are really tiny faces, and the chances that you're actually going to see the faces from tabletop at 3 feet away, you know, paint them if it makes you happy, but don't worry about painting like two-tone eyes. If you don't think you're ready yet, if you're not there yet, you know, I have a technique for painting two-tone eyes, like painting the whites and painting the pupil and then going in with your eyebrows. It's not crazy, but if you're not there yet and it's just causing you grief, paint the flesh, throw a wash on it. It'll look pretty good, I assure you. So we've got the blue base on the feathers on the frill here. We've got this blue here, and we're going to cover most of that with white. But I did want to bring that blue in because I think that it helps unify her color story. Now, when I talk a lot about like color story. I don't talk a lot about color theory and that sort of thing on here because I don't think that's necessarily the same thing. But I like trying to use the same tones on a single miniature because I feel like using like 3 different colors of blue from 3 different bottles when they're not necessarily harmonized together, it can make the model and those different elements seem like they're clashing, not matching. Whereas if you blend your blues together and, you know, they're in the same family, I'm using the same base blue for this blue that's here and this blue that's here, they'll look more harmonized ultimately overall on the miniature. If you want a quick tip, if you want things to look like they're harmonized, try to find a color that you can bring across them. For the Zeo Rangers, for example, that might be that you use a consistent gold across all of them, and that gold will help unify them together so they look like they're harmonized from a color story perspective. And it also, you know, it saves you some money because you don't have to buy extra paint, right? Like you can take your paint and go all sorts of places with it by blending it with other paints and just experimenting with them. You know, I've said it before, if you ask of your paint and you try and you experiment and you use it, you'll know what you can do with it better than if you just buy like 5 different colors of the same tone, like 5 different blues. You don't get to have the same relationship with each paint. So like if you have a set of 12 paints, those are your paints, use them in ways you wouldn't expect. Mix your yellows with your greens and mix your blues with your greens and see how that goes. You can highlight red with yellow and use a little bit of yellow to take that red and bring it into an orange, and it makes a nice highlight. You'd be surprised. You know, try mixing blacks and whites into your paints, see how that looks, and blend your colors, because you can do a lot with a very limited number of paints, and it can surprise you to see the variety and range you can get out of them. Know your color wheel, says Needs the One. Yeah, the color wheel and color theory is one of the things, I think, and I think we'll talk about it a little more in the future, but it's an easy way to, you know, create a nice story, and you know, build harmonies across your miniature. So one thing I'm going to do as we continue painting this miniature is I'm going to paint the shadows in, and I'm going to show you with a little bit of this blue. I'm going to use the blue to help build up the shadows on her cloth here a little bit, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Again, those colors can harmonize together really well. Just a little bit, just that little bit of blue and into that brown and black to kind of bring it down, make it a nice shade. That's the sort of thing that can elevate your painting and make things look both harmonized and unique and special. So that's something that will, you know, is a good way to develop your painter's intuition. That's the idea that as you paint, you can eventually get to understanding how your paints work, how your style evolves, what colors you like to paint, what you can ask of your paints, where the highlights go, all of that stuff. That comes from experience. So that painter's intuition you develop over time is something that will serve you really well. So I'm going to come in here with this white. I think I'm gonna try doing the highlights on this white because it's mostly this white color. I wanted to lay down this base. It doesn't look like there are that many areas of like the brown coming through too much, and I'm pretty sure this white's gonna cover it pretty well anyways. I'm gonna take my white and bring it a little bit of water in it, just so that I get a little bit of transparency out of it. So you can see there on the palette, it's got a little bit of a transparent kind of tone to it, but I want it thick enough that it doesn't immediately run into the cracks, because I want to maintain that blue areas of shadow on this miniature. So that's what I'm going to come in, and I'm going to I might thicken this up a little more with a little more of my base paint here, and come in, and I'm just going to kind of pick out those high points. Trevor, my first 40k army. Oh yeah, hello Trevor. I guess we played many moons ago, 4th edition 40k. Hello, thanks for tuning in, Trevor. I'm so thrilled you're joining me today to hang out and paint some Power Rangers. Let's see here. I'm gonna add this white in, and so you can kind of see how it's coming on. I'm using both the side of my brush and a little bit of the point to help control where that paint goes. And if I'm not too happy, if I find that the paint is looking a little bit blobby, I can always go in with a wash of that darker blue base in those trouble spots and kind of help marry that back and bring the shadows back. But for now, I'm going to use the tip to kind of get those little details in, and then I'm going to use a side to come in and do a wider area where I know the raised edges are going to really help protect it. So this flatter bustle area will kind of get that nice treatment with the side of my brush, and it'll help me help me, you know, get this done faster. It's kind of like the difference between painting a wall with a roller and a wall with a single paintbrush. You know, we're using the side of your brush is a little bit more like using a roller, right? So I'm just going to throw this on there. And yes, I am holding her upside down because I am right-handed and trying to get on the left side of this bustle with my right hand underneath her arm. It's a lot easier if I hold her upside down than if I try to squeeze my brush in there underneath her arm. That's kind of blocking me. And we're just going to touch the whites up like that, just like that. A little bit of brown is showing through here. We're going to see if I can cover it with a little bit of white. That base coat is going to give me a nice color here. Let's see. How's it going? It looks like it's... We're going to finish this up here. All right. yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. Now looking at this miniature right under her arm there's a little bit of brown peeking through. I'm not gonna stress about it. When I put this model down, I look at her from tabletop. Her arm is blocking most of that area. When I hold her upside down, that's when I can see that area. And I'm looking at her in a way that her arm isn't blocking everything in there. That's where I see it. But, you know, take the second. If you see stuff like that, take the second, put your miniature down, look at it, say, okay, can I see this? Is this something I need to stress about? Is this something I'm going to put paint over? And make the determination when you're looking at it from the distance you're going to be playing with your models. That's really important to help you get done. Now, I've said before that done is my favorite color of miniature, and it is because done, as you finish miniatures, you get a chance to improve and start again from scratch as you paint your next project, and it gives you a kind of an end point where it's just like, this is where I was in that moment when I painted this miniature. And as you progress over time, you'll be able to see your skills improve. Now, if you keep going back and you're just not happy with one miniature and you keep painting it, and you're, particularly if you're new, but also like I've had this happen to me recently where I'm just like, I've been working at a miniature, I've been working at it, I'm not happy with how it's looking, I keep struggling with it. Sometimes I just need a break, put it down. I'll call it done for now. I'll put it down. I'll work on something else. I'll bring some refreshed approaches to that miniature, maybe at a different time. But I won't stress about that process right off the bat, because ultimately, as we paint, we really want to focus on what we're finishing. The next model you paint will be better than the last model you paint. That's how progress works. If you keep working at the same miniature, you never have a point to improve from. You never have a point to refer back to. You never get that moment to go forward. And forward is what we want. We want to get progress. And you know, done is the way you want to go. Done is better than perfect. Always. You will always, as we pursue perfection and progress are enemies. And I will choose progress every time when it comes to my miniatures, because getting them done means I can play with them and means I can show them up and means I can enjoy them on the table. And then, you know, if I really want to come back to one later on, there's nothing stopping me. There is no miniature painting police who'll come and arrest me and say, hey, you know, you said this was done. No. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness there isn't a miniature painting police out there. You know, I could only imagine what it would say to me, looking at my shelves of, you know, in progress projects. Like, hey, you need to finish this. Oh my gosh. Let's all as hobbyists agree to never deputize a force of miniature painting police. Are we cool with that? I think that sounds like a great idea. I'll get the petitions up on one of those petition sites. Let us never all ever have miniature painting police. Are we all agreed? I think that's a good idea. So yeah, I'm painting out the white here. I'm just laying it down, and as I see I want to kind of bring the white out a little more, I'll add more white, I'll thicken those lines a little bit, and I'll just look at it. You know, this is a process of where you want to take this for. How far do you want to take this? How much detail, how much texture do you want to try to capture? How much white, how far do you want to take the white? It's all your choices. And yeah, this is something that you can kind of eventually you get to. You develop over time. And let's see here. Let's get this. I think I'm kind of happy with the way that's looking for now. We can come back to it later. And I just want to call that. I think the white's there. I like the blue. Underneath the white, but I can bring more of that white out and kind of push that blue back a little bit more so it reads more from the tabletop is white rather than blue. But I'm going to let that dry before I muck with it some more. And then I'm going to come back and, I have something special for some of those whites on there and try to dash it up. So it's been about 45 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of stretching, our necks, our shoulders, our wrists. We'll do one of these, because that's important. Do a posture check. Every so often, it's really important to take care of your body. You want your body to be happy as your spirit is painting miniatures. And part of that is, making sure your shoulders are relaxed. Sometimes as we paint our miniatures up at our eyes, our shoulders get all tight, our back, our posture, we come down to it. We turn into these balls of humans that are all crumpled, and that's not going to help you over time. It's not going to you're not going to feel good in the morning if you're painting all tight and tiny. So relax, give yourself a little moment, look at something that's far away for a little bit, let your eyes refocus, let your wrists and your hands get a chance to relax a little bit, especially if you're someone who grasps the paintbrush really hard. I really do want to emphasize, if you're holding your paintbrush in a way that you get that pencil dent, like when you're in grade school, learning to write, that pencil dent in your finger, that's a bad sign. Your hands are going to hurt. You won't have the control you need. So if you can, grasp your brush gently, right? So it's enough you don't need a super grip on your brush to really just focus and hold it and use it. So a looser grip will give you more flexibility in your hand because your muscles aren't all tense. So it'll give you more control. It will help reduce some of that shaking, because the tighter I find that I grip my brush, the more my hands shake, because everything is tense up in my hand. So that's really important. Just hold your brush with just enough to feel like you have it. It's not going to slip out, but it's not it's the same grip as ooh, I've got a rubber pencil. That's kind of the amount of force you really want to use when holding your brush. Just give yourself the freedom to not feel like you have to have a death grip on the thing. All right, here. Ruel joined chat. Hello, Ruel. If you haven't been keeping up with Ruel has been playing games every day on his channel. On, oh my gosh, at 5 p.m. Pacific every day. There's new board games, lots of fun games to discover. He also joins us to play on Worldwide Playday. He played Clank with us last week, and this week he's playing Arboretum, which is really fun. I love that game too. So much fun. So do say hi to Ruel, who's up in Facebook. Hello. Delton says, for those of you who are like me who want a larger brush, there are rubber grips that you can slide on brushes to make them a bit wider to hold. Yes, those are very good, especially I mentioned that my partner, he has a hard time, his hands shake. He's a big guy, he's got big hands. There are a couple brush makers who make bigger handles on their brushes as well. So Army Painter has a line of brushes that are triangular. The handle is triangular. It's a little bit thicker, so they're nice and easy to hold. What is the name of this channel on Twitch? Erminel, that is Play Renegade. Look for us on Twitch if you're looking to follow us there. If you're on Facebook, looking to jump in on Twitch. But in terms of ways you can help improve the grip, because sometimes the brush you love, the brush you think, oh, that has a beautiful fiber, I really like the way it holds a point, but man, that handle isn't great. The other thing you can do is you can use tape. Use some electrical tape or whatever tape you have, and you can wrap it, even a sports wrap. You can wrap your handle. That's an easy way to get thicken up that handle so you can grasp it more firmly without having to buy new brushes. Even if you've got tape in your house, you just wrap your handle. You can get a little bit more out of the brush you have, instead of trying to find new ones with extra stuff, right? So don't hesitate to try and modify your tools to work better for you. Let's talk about those feathers here. Speaking of feathers, so I'm gonna do, we covered this a little bit with some wet on wet blending. I'm almost done here on my whites here on my palette, so I'm gonna add a couple more drops a little bit later probably. But I'm gonna take some of that water that's got a little bit of a blue tinge. I'm gonna take that white over here, and I'm not gonna worry too much about blending that, because I'm gonna drop some new white on my palette. But I'm gonna take that white, I'm gonna mix it up here. I'm gonna take some of that blue that's left over, and I'm just gonna add it. I'm basically scraping what's left on my palette to put on my model. That's fine. I want a little bit of transparency on it, because as I'm gonna work from the tips in on these feathers here, so that the tips look a little bit whiter than the edges here. So if I need to just focus, let me know in chat. But I'm just gonna take the wet brush, I'm gonna come in, and I'm just gonna move that paint around so it's kind of focused more. Let's see here. Focus it on the tips a little more. Pick up that white. And if this isn't working, I'll probably just mix up drop some new white on there and use make it a little more thick and opaque. But I want a little bit of that transparency, so I'm just hitting it up a little bit. And this will help give me some variation on the feathers, and so that the bases are a little bit darker. And the transparency is going to work with the paint, the darker blue that's underneath it, so that it looks like it's blended, but really it's just a thin coat of paint. So I'm going to work outwards this way. Here, focusing that more paint, trying to deposit more paint on the tips of the feathers than on the base. And we'll just get these kind of spiky details on, just like that. Just like that. And this gives a little bit, again, it gives a little bit of the depth we're looking for when it comes to painting the illusion of light and shadow. Because that's ultimately what we're doing on a miniature. We're painting a little bit of color and the illusion of light and shadow on the miniature when it comes to highlighting and those sorts of techniques. As you develop, you kind of develop this intuition as your skills develop, and as the more miniatures you paint, you get this intuition of where should the highlights be on this model. You look at the model and you go, okay, well, the high points are going to get some highlighting. The edges are probably going to be the place where I pick up a little bit more color and a little bit more light. It'll catch the light a little bit on those edges, and so that's where you'll end up placing those points. Kind of like when Bob Ross, he touches those trees on things, the light hits the edges of the leaves, the highest leaves and the leaves edges, and that's what he's replicating in his paintings. We're doing the same thing on ours. We're just gonna capture a little bit of light that hits these feathers here. And there we are. Just a little bit here. I'm not stressing. I don't know if you've noticed. There are undersides to these feathers on the miniature. I'm not stressing about painting those. I don't paint the bottom of my miniature base. I don't paint the bottom parts of a lot of the miniatures if I'm not going to see them sitting at the table. So, again, this is the moment where you can take a look and figure out, okay, is it worth it for me to paint the undersides here? Now I put the blue on there so it would catch, but it's not like perfect. You can actually see it's pretty splotchy. So, but you won't really see that much of it. You'll see, your eye will catch a little bit of that blue, but I'm going to spend my time focusing on the feathers on top, because you will absolutely see those. So I'll add my details onto there, spend my time on the stuff that we all see, and that will make me happier, and it'll get me closer to done quicker. So I've layered out that white and kind of given it the hint of highlights. It still looks like very different in terms of color from this back point here, but I think I'm gonna give it a wash of white just to lighten up that shadow a little bit so it doesn't read as blue. And we're gonna make up a wash of white right now. So we're gonna take a couple drops of white paint, throw that on my palette there. This is clean white now. I've mixed a little bit of blue into where it used to live on my palette. I'm fine with that. I'm going to take our little cup palette. I'm going to take some of my water right out of the wash cup. It's got a little bit of a blue tinge to it. I'm not worried about that because the paint pigment will overwhelm whatever like diluted paint is in my paint water. As long as you're using fresh paint water, chances are it's not, this is what you're looking at is not going to be an issue. I'm going to pull some of that paint from my palette. I'm going to use a little bit. I'm going to mix that into, it's really hard to see in this cup here, but I'm basically mixing that into the white because it's white on white. So there we go. We have this really milky consistency. You can see it on my bristles there. It's not very pigmented. So I'm just gonna, and I don't want it to be super pigmented. I want it to be just a light kind of coat. It looks almost like watered down milk. That's the color we're looking for. I'm gonna put on this wash to lighten up that blue shadow on our bustle a little bit. I'm gonna take a little bit of my favorite hobby tool. One of my favorite hobby tools. I have a lot of them actually. This is dish soap. Put in a little squeezy bottle. I filled this thing up, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago. Because we use such small quantities, it goes a long way. It's super cheap and it's super effective. So that dish soap is on my palette. You see that little dot right there? It's that little slippery point. Let me change the focus for you a little bit. You can see how this whole process is going down. So that little point right here, it looks like this little drop of water. That's my paint. I'm going to pick it up on my brush. That's all I'm going to use, just that much. I'm going to mix that into my wash, and it will break the water tension. That way, as a wash, it'll just kind of run into the cracks and crevices. And I'm just going to paint that on, just lightly. It's not too much. I'm not looking to try to deposit too much color on it. I just want a white, lighter wash to like take the intensity off of that blue. And this is part of the process. I might not be this might not be the right way to go. I can always paint over it later if I'm not happy with it, but I'm actually liking the way it looks. Now this is a wash that usually when you make a wash like this with paint and just soap, the intensity as it dries down fades. So it becomes a little bit less intense. I think the shine in the water tends to make things look a little more intense in terms of color. So I'm not too worried about that. I just want to take some of that wash and just apply it in and help sink into those cracks and crevices a little bit. Take off some of that darkness in the blue so it reads a little more milky and white. And that makes me happy. I'm pretty happy with the way that's looking. Again, very different than feathers on top. So I'll let that dry. Give my brush a good solid rinse because with the soap in there, that's something that we definitely want to take advantage of. And Chris is saying that saliva is the best way to get a consistent point on your brush. It can be. Yes, I'm a brush slicker. I've talked about it before. You don't need to. And there are certain paints. Most hobby paints are non-toxic because they're sold in such small quantities, but even then, just check to make sure that the stuff that you're using, there's a lot of particularly paints like that are blue. They might have something in them that makes them blue that you might not want to put in your body. So every manufacturer has a whole product sheet, that tells you what is what's in the stuff you're painting with. So it's a good so Chris is mentioning cadmium. Yeah, that's the stuff that makes paint blue, and that's something you should watch out for. You can always ask a manufacturer, hey, what's in your paint? Do you use blue in your cadmiums? Especially if you're using artist paints like I do, in these larger bottles, fluid acrylics, those artist paints, you'll sometimes see that products, but they have they're really good about keeping really good records of what's in their paints as a matter of just course. So just check that out. Daniel, hello Daniel, thanks for joining. Thanks. Daniel is a prolific board game content creator. He does all sorts of stuff in the board game industry. He Oh my goodness, I'm a part of some of his board game groups, which are really like Facebook groups. I don't think I've actually played a game with him. We should fix that, Daniel. So it's exciting to see folks in the board game world looking at painting miniatures. I'm really excited. So, uh, there there are a lot of really fun games that you love that um, that have things that you can paint in them. It could be meeples, it could be miniatures. And right now, if you're by yourself, it's hard to enjoy your collection of board games without other people to play with. But painting miniatures has always been something you can do by yourself and still get extra enjoyment out of your collection. So I'm a huge fan of painting miniatures. Um, Needs of the One, who mentioned in Twitch a really great point when I was talking about wrapping your brushes with tape. They mentioned moleskin bandages. Again, it has a nice, soft, flexible grip, and it's not like it's not hard to hold. It has a little bit of give, so it gives you a little bit of extra cushion, which is nice. Again, it gives you a little bit of grip and a little bit of cushion. That's the sort of thing you're looking for if you're trying to be a little more ergonomic and take care of your bodies, and also like make your tools more accessible. Let's see here. Now I've got the bases, like the base kind of colors on this. Rita's feathers on her collar here. I think I'm gonna come in with my detail brush now. Now's the time for this teeny tiny brush to shine. I can give it a good rinse, moisten up the bristles. But this is the moment where you do want to take a little bit of time to rinse your brush out every time you load it. There are very few bristles on this brush, and it's very easy for paint to dry on it. And that's what we want to avoid. So painting with thin paints, paints thinned with water, that'll be really important as we paint with this brush. And rinsing often, again, also very important. These bristles are also a little bit shorter than my base coat brush, so we do want to make sure that we're not getting paint up in the ferrule. We're keeping the paint on the tip of the brush rather than getting it all the way up. So when we load, we're going to be extra careful here. And I'm just going to paint the tiniest hint of feather details. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to let myself go crazy here. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to paint like a middle vein and just some tiny dots, really barely there, because I just want the impression of feather texture, but I don't need perfection, just the impression. When we're painting on miniatures, the impression that something is there, just like shading in a face where the shade settles in the eye sockets, that's usually more than enough to make the mind say, hey, that's a face. Our brains are really good at distinguishing faces. Our brains are really good at filling in the dots. That's an evolutionary thing. So we're going to take advantage of our awesome brains and not drive ourselves crazy by trying to paint perfect, like, feather details on a miniature we're going to handle, we're going to play, we're probably going to drop, we're going to transport. But instead we're going to give the impression for our brains to go, oh yeah, that's kind of like what feathers look like. There's a little bit of detail in there. Again, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be little dots all across that give the impression of texture. And a little line down the middle of each feather. You don't even have to do this. If you're like, that doesn't seem like it's worth the time, don't. Your miniature. I'm not going to tell you how to paint your miniature. You want to paint Rita's dress purple? You go ahead. You paint Rita's dress purple. You want to paint these feathers green? You paint them green. Alt approaches and alt color schemes make me so happy. You want to paint Rita like a Green Ranger? First of all, I would love to see that. Please send me photos. If you do, to go with the rest of your green. If you paint all of the Rangers green, I know at least a few people have done that with like a second set of Rangers, something like that. That's just fun. That's super fun to me. And honestly, you should be painting the miniatures in whatever colors make you happy, in whatever ways you make you happy. So if you don't want to paint eyes, you don't want to paint feather details, don't. I'm just showing you. I get a chance to show you what's making me happy on this miniature, and I love the idea of doing these little hints. It's kind of like, this is for me, but I get to spend a little bit of extra time on those feather details and just give them a little bit of love. So that white is starting to dry down on her bustle, and it's looking pretty nice. The feathers are looking pretty good too. Let's see here. Daniel, is there 101 gear list that anyone has for painting miniatures? These brushes look super fancy and fine point. Okay. So 101 list, I've mentioned in the past already. A dry brush, a decent base coat brush, and a fine detail brush. If you're going to pick the one out of those three to spend your money on, spend it on the detail brush. There are a number of hobby companies that make a bunch of different brushes. Privateer Press makes one. I think they have like this super tiny brush called the Psycho. I find it almost too, I find it too small generally, especially for miniatures from Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid, where the scale is so much bigger. But you can go to the watercolor section. This is a Raphael brush 0. I actually cut the end off. Remember when I said, hey, modify this brush? This was like this brush here used to be like this long on the end here, and I basically took a little saw and I cut off the end. And this is a watercolor brush. It's a size 0 if you're shopping at the fine art store. That'll do you pretty well. Size 0 is like the perfect size for a detail brush. And watercolor brushes tend to be natural fiber, so they hold paint moisture a little bit longer, so paint is less likely to dry in the end. And they also, because of that ability to hold onto moisture a little bit with the cuticle of the hairs, this whole structure of hair thing, it's less likely to, it's more likely to hold on to moisture, less likely to dry out, and because it's holding on to moisture, it's more likely to hold a tip for longer as you're painting with it. So that's where I would look. Most hobby brushes have some sort of they have actual names that say this is a detail brush or a fine detail brush. In the art store, you're looking for a brush that's like the size 0 brush. Those will do you well. So watercolor brushes, basically what we're doing on the miniature is watercolor painting. We're thinning paints with water. We're blending them together. We're using the transparency of the paint a little bit. All of the properties you're looking for in a good hobby brush when it comes to those details. That's what you're looking for in a miniature brush. You can do everything with a size 2 brush. Actually, so this is my size 2 brush. This is my size 2 brush from Winsor Newton. I do a lot of stuff with this brush. With the tip, I can do a lot of stuff with this brush. It's my base coat brush. I do a lot of basic details with this brush. It can do a lot of things. A good base coat brush, if it's got a good point on it, will take you a long ways. Size 1, size 2, you can do a lot. It's a very versatile brush. If you're gonna invest in a single brush, if you're gonna go, okay, all I need is a dry brush, one dry brush, and one brush and one other brush, get a size 1 brush from the artist store. Get a kind of standard, the term I think a lot of hobby companies use, a standard brush. That will go a long ways to getting you set up. And let's see here. What else do I have here? Let me touch up a little bit of this white on the edge here, because it's on the front of Rita here. I've totally missed this area. So I'm just going to add the white in there and let the white live there. Make me happy, make her happy, and she'll look a little more finished. Focusing on what you can see. And this is from the front of Rita. This is definitely something you can see. I'm going to take a little bit of blue in there too and just give the hint of blue. It'll help me with the coverage of the gold that I dry brushed, because I did do gold first on this miniature. I painted the gold, then I painted all the cloth around it, because it's easier than painting the gold after on the cloth and then trying to clean up the cloth afterwards. You're going to have to paint it again anyways. So here we are. I'm going to add that white right in there. And look at that. She's looking ready. She's coming a long ways. She's just about there. Now, let's get some I want to get some more white on this bustle here, because I think now that that wash is kind of coated down a little bit, I can better see where I want to like pick up that white, make it a little bolder, make it a little more solid, make it a little more deliberate. Because when we paint that first coat on, it doesn't have perfect coverage. We can strengthen where the white lives and really highlight it and push it out a little more. I'm gonna throw a little bit of white in here, right there, and a little bit of white right here. So let me change the focus a little bit for you. Move up to the camera a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just picking up a little bit of the white from my palette here. And it's picked up some of the moisture from my wet palette, so I'm not worried about thinning it too much. It's a pretty thin paint to begin with. And I'm not obscuring any details. When you can lay on a layer of paint and it has some transparency to it, you'll know right away that that's thinned enough. So I'm just going to use that, kind of give that a little bit of a strengthening here. There we go. My Rita is metallic like Mario, so I can avoid all the fine points. Nice, Daniel. Lord Malachite on Twitch. Licking your brush is what got clock painters into trouble. The paintbrush painted radium. Yeah, that is a horrifying story. I think there's a whole, like, if you do any sort of research, there were these paints that, like, they made, they were radioactive, and it was really bad. Like, they were manufacturing, like, the 50s, I think, and it was just not good. It was just not good. So, yeah, it's really important. Like, know what's in your paint. Know what's safe. And do a little bit of research if you're gonna ingest it, right? Let's get onto the sphere first, and then I'm gonna pull out the fancy stuff. Oops. Yes. So I knock my miniatures about a lot. It's something that I kind of, I'm kind of a klutz when it comes to that. So I'm adding a little bit of red on my palette right now. This is Privateer Press Kato Red Base. It's a nice bright red, which is nice and versatile. I'm gonna add a little bit of black to my palette and a little bit of blue as well. But when it comes to, so I'm gonna drop the black right there. When it comes to like handling my models, I drop them a lot. I knock them about a lot. I have yet, and this is a testament to the manufacturer, I've yet to break a Power Rangers Heroes Grid miniature. They're just so flexible. The material's so resilient that I've not broken it yet. So I'm really excited to be able to like accidentally knock stuff around, and things are still good. Let's see here. Any comments, any questions beyond this? It looks like we're doing great. We're still on track for time. So I'm going to add to this red. I'm going to change the focus a little bit so you can see my palette nice and clear here. And we're going to do a little bit of color blending. Remember when I was talking about using a little bit of the blues? We're going to do a little bit of color blending. Let's play with a little bit of the reds here. So I'm going to pull a little bit of the red out because we've got this sphere here that I want to paint with the red. I'm going to pull a little bit of that red out. I'm going to touch, just barely touch, just that much, barely. You can barely see of blue. I'm going to add that blue into my red, just a little bit, make it kind of purpley. I'll add a little more red into there. Kind of get this kind of just a tinge of blue to create a little bit of a shadow red. I'm going to cover that sphere up here with that red. And so as a base, this is going to help harmonize with the blue I've used on the rest of the model. And I'm going to bring that blue into the shadows of the cloth as well. So I'm going to paint that red right onto the miniature. So adjust the focus again so you can see how I'm painting it on, where it's ending up. Let's see here. Is that better? There you go. There we are. So you can see where that red has ended up. Just to get onto that red sphere here. Just so. And we'll do the other side because, you know, the sphere isn't just one-sided, and you'll see this miniature from all sides. So there we are. And I'm already noticing that my brush is starting to fray a little bit. See, the hairs are coming off of it. It's time to give my brush a rinse again and keep some moisture on it. Bring the tips together. So there's the red on the miniature. There's the red on the miniature. Got that base red down. Alright, so we've got that red. And I'm going to take that brown. So let's look at my little painting diary here. And I was using some P3 Bloodstone to get the brown, and that shadow color, I was using a little bit of Sanguine Base mixed into it to create that shadow color. So I'm gonna do that. Let's get some Sanguine Base onto that as well. I can also use that as a bit of a darker shadow on the red. So we will come back to that. We will use that more. But let's pop this up. I'll pull some Sanguine Base, put on my palette here, so you can see as we start blending out the colors again. So here's a Sanguine Base from P3. Again, just a touch. Put that on the palette. Let's get some Bloodstone on there. So the Sanguine Base brings in a little bit of purple color. Let's get some Bloodstone. That's Blood Tracker Brown. Let's do some, that's Adrian Blush. Here's the Bloodstone. There's my Bloodstone. And we'll pull a little bit of that and put it on my palette. Again, just tiny drops. Just that much. And we'll pull that onto the palette. It looks like a lot because I'm spreading it out on my palette just to help bring moisture from the palette on into the paint. But it's really not that much. And then, oops. And then we'll start blending these colors together. We'll add a little bit of that blue here. So we'll add a little bit of the blue first. We'll pull that in. That'll help create that shadowy color. We'll pull in a touch of the Sanguine Base in there, kind of create a darker shadow color and that purpley color. And now that I've mixed those two colors together, I'm going to bring a little bit of that into my Blood Tracker Brown, which is the base color that I painted her jacket in. And we'll just add it until I'm kind of comfortable with the shadow color. I think I'm going to add a touch of black into this as well. I did pull some knowing I was going to need some shadow color. So we'll pull a little bit of black in here, down into this color here. Now, this is a lot of black, this tiny tip. I'm going to put some beside here, and I'm just going to mix it in a little bit at a time. Ooh, that is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming color. But that little bit of blue, that little bit of Sanguine Base, a little bit of that blue, we'll kind of blend it all together to see if we can get a nice shadowy color. I'm just going to paint into the bottom here and see how this goes. Now, I did wash this with a little bit of strong tone before we finished last week, so I really want to be careful with how I apply this. Because it might not line up completely. I might have to mix in a little bit of Sanguine, or a little bit of that strong tone into this color as well. So let's see here. Let's see how this shade shows up as a shadow tone, and if I need to mix a little bit more brown in there, or if I'm happy with it. So let's see. We'll just paint in the shadow crease right here. We're just going to cut that crease in there. It's a matching color. It's a pretty good match actually, but I'm not sure if it's dark enough as a shadow. I'm gonna add just a little bit more of that black right in there. We'll try to cut that shadow a little bit crisper, and so we're gonna just add that shadow right there we are. Nice line right there. I'm gonna add that shadow, just a crisp shadow in there. Now this is a little bit transparent. I did water it down a little bit. Oops. So some of my white wash kind of creeped in there. I'm going to hide that with my little shadow color up here. And I'm just going to color that in. I'm going to emphasize the white by putting a dark color right next to it. And I'll also erase a mistake while I go. I'm going to do a nice crisp shadow in there. I did that crisp shadow there. I did a soft C-shaped shadow here. I'll just do soft C-shape line there. Just give it a little bit of, just a little bit of kind of a little bit more definition. And there's a little bit of shadow in here. I'll just do that one. This shadow up here where it's painted in, you can see how the wash is settled in there. So I like to just add a little bit of that dark color right into the edge, and it just emphasizes that shadow just a little bit more. Let's see here. And we'll add this line in here, and we'll add a line in there, and we'll just emphasize that, those creases in the cloth, just that little bit. So the less pronounced the line is, it's because the less deeply cut it is. The thicker that line is, the more heavily sculpted that shadow has been on the model. I'm gonna let the model tell me how thin or thick. And you can play with this. This is something that's kind of, you can do. This isn't like a very advanced technique. You're just following the shadows from the wash that was applied. But really, this is something that you can kind of play with and figure out as you go and how you like to paint those shadows in. All right, there we are. So I've got a little bit of shadows in there. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. I'll throw in a little line, just the thinnest hint of a line, just like right there. And that's looking pretty good. Let's bring her into focus so you can see the whole effect. Those nice crisp cuts on the cloth give you the little bit of a sense of the shadows where they exist. And again, it's the illusion of light and shadow. So now that we have that red that's dried on, I'm going to take a little bit of, so this red up here, that's going to be my highlight red. So I'm going to paint that highlight up into the corner up at the top of the sphere here. It's going to be pretty bright. Ooh, look at that. Ooh. And it's just like a little dab. Let's go real close in here and you can see just how dabby that looks. It's pretty, it's not fancy, it's just a little dab of paint. And I'm going to zoom out again so you can see how I'm painting that on. So I'm painting that bright red on, and then within that little red dot, I'm going to put just a dot of white. I'm going to pick up a little bit of white, still on my red brush, because I want the paints, I'm okay with this paint if it marries and muddies a little bit. I'll just paint a little dash across there. Give the illusion of light reflecting off of the sphere. And then I'm going to blend that, I think I'm going to blend that a little bit with a little more red on the rest of the sphere too. I'm not going to give it too much. We're going to brighten that. So that's what that looks like. So I've got that dark base on there. I'm going to go within that dark base. I'm going to paint a little bit of the red. I'm going to shape this white dot a little bit more and blend that in a little bit. Try to curve it a little more. And yeah. It's a nice easy way to get a kind of spherical looking shade on there. And then we'll have just a second reflection just at the bottom here. I'm just going to add a dot of white right there. So got the little curved white dot. I've got the brighter red to bring it out. I've got the dark red as a base underneath to give it some dimension and some shadow. But that's what that looks like. So you can see it nice up and close. Let's add this here. We'll go do the back side again. We're going to throw on the red. Nice and easy. Boom. It's not completely there. And if I want to paint in some of that shadow, I can paint it on wet and they'll blend together a little bit. It's kind of thicker, this shade color. I'm not too worried about it. And then, let's get that little white circle on there. So it's just a semicircle, like a kind of a C That's all I'm painting on. And then I'm going to do a little dot on the other side. Just like that. Catch both reflections. And I'll brighten them up. If I need to tidy it up a little bit, I can, but that's all that expression really needs. You don't need a ton of detail on it. You're just painting little dots and some red. Bonk, bonk. I'm gonna add that. I'm gonna strengthen the white on this one side a little bit, I think, just so I can get that reflection just a little more expressed on this miniature right here. Boom, boom. There you go. There we are. So this is where we're at. Now we're gonna paint the gray of her hair. Nothing crazy. It's black and white. We're gonna mix them together. We're gonna paint it on. I'm trying to think how I think there might be some gold detail around her hair a little bit. Let me look real quick. I'm gonna pull up a reference photos. Always good to have. Now, in the Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid group, they're really good about having really good about sharing reference photos, which are really nice. It's nice to have on hand if you're looking for that sort of thing. If you're painting and you don't know, like, you're looking at alt, especially like the alt Rita on the Kickstarter Heroes of the Grid deluxe box. It's hard to figure out how to paint that character if you're not as familiar with the alt version, and so it's good to have just a nice look at that sort of thing if you're having trouble. So in that group, there are great people who are constantly sharing reference photos, and it's nice to just look at something and see how it's kind of expressed. I think there is a little bit of gold on her hair, so I think what I'll do now is I'm gonna do some dry brushing on her hair just to get the gold up on the top area, but I'm not going to express it too heavily. I'm not going to try to emphasize it if it gets away from me, because I think the gray is going to have a pretty decent impact on her hair. Let me double check this here. Let me know in chat if you are also, like, if you're a fan of Power Rangers and you know, like, how I should tackle the hair. I know there was gold on the front, which I did do. Oh, yes, I forgot. There's a red stone on the front of her head as well, and I think I should do that too. So I'm going to do that with that shadowy red color that I painted on with a touch of red in. I'm not going to do too much in there. I'm just going to get the red in there, because the eye will pick it up and know, oh yeah, that gem is red. I'll just put that red in there. It's nothing crazy. You don't have to go crazy on this. When you're expressing these existing details on a character, and I'll put the red in the circles as well, because it'll help make the miniature look finished when you've got these details painted. Just like that. So red on her head, red on her staff. Get the other sides of that. And let's see here. Let's see. All right, so we're going to get some gray onto her hair. You know what? Let's see. I think I'm going to leave it mostly gray, because I don't honestly think that. Let's see here if I could get this reference photo. Rita, do I have you? Let's double check, because I think it's worth it for me to know. If I've got this thing going, if this is right. Yeah, it's got some brown. In the sculpt, it looks like it's brown. Well, I've got some brown on my palette, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to paint. Yeah, I will paint the gray on it first, and then I'll paint some of the details on it afterwards with some of the brown. But I don't think we have to stress too much about those brown details. So let's get this. Let's get the gray mixed up real quick. So black plus white is gray, nothing crazy. I'm gonna add just a touch. So white first, because again, I don't want to contaminate my white if I'm gonna be using it on other things. A little bit of white. We'll just touch the blue, just barely, just a drop of that. And then just the lightest hint of black. Again, I'm going to pull a little bit from this area here. It's not a lot of black because it goes so far. And that little bit of blue is reading very heavily blue. Woo! That's a lot of blue. So I'm going to pull a little more white in there and kind of lighten up that whole thing, that load a little bit, and add a little bit more black in there. Just to try to get it to read a little more gray. That's a lot better. It's quite gray now. And let's get that hair painted. All her hair is going to be gray. Just like that. Yeah. That's looking... Now with the hair is like one of the final things we've left on this model in terms of the details. So like as we finish the hair, we're going to get a good sense of how close to done this is. Now when we first did this model and you dry brushed most everything gold, wasn't looking so hot, I will admit. When we start, there's always a pit in every miniature where you're just like, I don't know if this is the right way to go. Forge ahead, go forward, and then you'll figure out very quickly what's working and what's not working, and then you can go in and correct and fix and adjust your approach as necessary. So here is the gray on her head, and that's this whole area here. I'm not going to paint, I don't know if I'm going to paint the brown on as heavily as her initial costume was, because I think it looks, honestly, the way the brown was in her hair kind of looked cheap. You know, it looked like a budget costume because it probably was a budget costume. I want to fancy it up a little bit, so I might come in with a little bit of brown mixed with some gold instead, make it look a little fancier. Let's see here. And let's double check here. Oh yeah, there we go. A little bit of, yeah, and I think the tiny detail sculpted in here for the brown to go on, that's just gonna stress me out to paint. So I'm gonna leave that kind of, I think I'm gonna leave that a little bit more. I'm gonna let the impression of her gray hair kind of carry the look of this, rather than trying to get too much into the weeds and trying to paint out tiny lines of brown. So we've got the impression of gray in here, and I'll let that dry. I'll paint up the bits that I can kind of see. I'm going to put this model down and look at it from tabletop here, and make the determination about whether or not this is something that I want to paint. I do want to find a way to define her hair a little bit with the sculpted detail on there, but I don't think brown is the right way. I'm not thinking brown is the right way. Let's see. Let's make a call. Let's make a call real quick. I think what I will do is I'm gonna let that hair dry first before we make any rash decisions. But I think what I might do is I'm gonna cheat a little bit, and I'm gonna mix some of the brown with some black and kind of paint it in on those strips. Just really straightforward. Just kind of go a little bit kind of crazy. Not drive myself crazy, but I'm gonna give the impression of it. It'll kind of look like the impression of that hair, and it will give me like enough like delineation in the hair to give it some pizzazz, so it doesn't look so flat, because it's looking kind of flat right now. It needs some shadow. It needs some oomph in there. So spend another 45 minutes. Take a moment, stretch out. Yeah, give me one of these, give me one of those. We'll stretch out our necks, and then we're gonna get painting on her hair. Now, I think I'm pretty happy with the coverage. It kind of looks, I'm okay if it shows up a little bit and it's reading a little bit of splotchy, because that's kind of what hair does. But I'm gonna come in, and what I'll do is I'm going to take a little bit of that brown that we mixed earlier and that shadow for the shadows of here, and I'm going to add a little more light brown to it, and then I'm going to take a little bit of that sanguine base so that it matches kind of what she's wearing on her clothes, because that's kind of the same brown. And then I'm just going to paint these strips on. So let's get real up in here, and I'm going to get really close with this camera. So this Power Rangers Heroes with the Grid logo is going to probably hide me, because I want to get this on. I'll move the camera just so, and I'm gonna focus in. I'll go one more. There we go. We'll go focus in right up in there. Right up in there. Woo! Yeah. And we will just get the strips painted on. Just get them on. We'll just get them on. Just get them on. And again, I'm not worried. These strips weren't perfect on the show. They're probably not going to be totally perfect on this model, but from tabletop, this will look like a finishing touch. Oops. That will kind of get the right impression of the mini. It's the impression of the character we're shooting for. Ooh. And that is what we're doing here. So we're going to paint these brown strips on. And just like that. Nothing too crazy. Nothing crazy. And if it goes off, that's fine. We're not going to stress about it. I'm not trying to totally paint by color or paint exactly to the sculpt, because hair is really forgiving like that. It's kind of a cheat, if you will. Hair is one of the most forgiving things to paint. You can paint extra hair on a face, like eyebrows, for example, that isn't sculpted on, and you can paint the hair so it kind of exists and spreads out beyond its borders to kind of get to places it shouldn't necessarily be on the model. So it's really forgiving, and I'm not worried about it not matching up the sculpt too much, because the hair itself will kind of bleed in. That's kind of how her hair is. Like it can bleed into different places, and the strips aren't like perfect strips. They're just like kind of look ragged on the costume even. So I'm gonna let that, like, if the lines aren't perfect, I'm gonna lean into it as opposed to fight it and try to make these perfect and try to make these exact, because the sculpt might be a little more perfect than the reality, and really what we're trying to capture is the character. I'm gonna put these little lines on the bottom of the hair, but I'm not gonna stress about them being perfect down here. As long as when you look at her from the back side like this, you get a good sense of like, hey, those strips are kind of painted. That's all we're looking for. We're not trying to get this super perfect. I'm just gonna throw them on. Get the impression that they're there, so they look done. That's the important part. So we'll zoom right out again, and we'll get a good look at her from a little bit further away. There you go. That looks like her hair. That's looking right. That's looking appropriate. I'll add those little dots. That's looking pretty good. And then, all right. We will also get in I think we're gonna do a black wash on her hair. Okay, so here's my thinking on this. Stay with me. I'm gonna put a black wash on the hair because there's a little bit of sculpts that are in there. So I'm gonna try where the gray was mixed for hair before. I'm gonna cowboy it and mix my wash on my wet palette. Take a little bit of soap. You know what? I'm not even gonna add soap. I think I want that splotchy color, and I'm just gonna take a little bit of black and mix it into the last leftover of the gray that I made for her hair initially. And I'm just gonna paint this on and paint that wash on, using the transparency to kind of get a variated color on there. I'm okay if it hits that brown too. I'm not being careful here. Let me be very clear about that, because really I want that shadow in there. So I'm just going to add that gray up, and it's going to give the hair a little bit of texture, I think. And that's what I want. So there, and that shade sitting up at the top gives her that impression of, yeah, the little bits of sculpt I'm using to make this whole thing work for me is really what I'm going for here. And that really gets that finished hair look done. All right, hair's done. What other details do we have yet to do? Ooh, a little bit of white on those pokey poke things on the corners here. Yeah, let's get those Boom, 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 boom. On there. These little spiky things. I don't know why they're white. Honestly, and I'm not loving how they're reading too much, but I'm just gonna add them in. I can come back at them later if I'm like, I think I want to paint them silver maybe, and I can always do that. If I want to paint them silver, I can always come back at it later. Make that call once this is dried, and I can look at the miniature from table. After I've played a game, I can make a determination of, no, I think silver will make me happier, or maybe the white will make me happy. Who knows? Just throw that on there, and some. Oh, those little dots I painted red are actually blue. Let's get the blue on there. Let's get the blue on there. Just same technique as we did with the red. We're just going to paint the circle in. And then we're going to come in with white once that's dry and brighten that up. So paint that circle in with the blue. Bonk. Bonk. Just like that. Let that dry. It's looking good. And then we'll come in with some white. So, what else did I promise you? Oh, yeah. I promised you something special. So, I'm going to, let's go over to the paint stuff. We're gonna do some stuff with this product. It's called interference paint. And it's a little bit interesting to work with, because ultimately what interference paint is it's kind of like it changes depending if it's on white or black. It reads differently. They paint this little strip on there. I don't know if the light is making it read gold, but this, depending on what angle you're looking at, this interference paint shines gold, but it kind of reads slightly whitish depending on the angle you're at. So it's really interesting to work with. I have a couple versions of it. I actually water some of it down. This is my interference blue, which I'm going to use on her bustle here and on her feathers. This interference gold I'm going to use to highlight the gold on the miniature. So I'm going to do a drop of it on the palette here. This is artist stuff, and this is the active product that makes all of those, like, if you're one of those people who have seen like the color shift paints, if you mix this stuff into a base flat paint for miniatures, you'll get a color shift paint. This is the stuff that makes the colors shift. So this interference gold is a little bit thick, so you do have to water it down a little bit and know how to apply it. So I'm just gonna throw it on here and we'll see how it reads on camera. But what it does is it, as a highlight for gold, it just brightens the gold right up and it makes it look super bright. Just like that, because the gold underneath is reflecting light. So what's happening is the light is hitting both the interference paint and it's hitting the gold, and it's reflecting two ways. So it's reading very gold, but it's also reading kind of whitish. But it's not white, it's actually the gold. So that's what that looks like. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to zoom right in so you can see it up close here, because I think that it might be better and easier to capture and kind of get the full effect of. So there, you can kind of see how I just like applied it, almost like a dry brush. And then when I shift it, you get a better read of how that paint looks in different lighting. So there's some on this area here, some on this area here, touch some up here. It's really interesting stuff. So I'm gonna kind of go over this miniature with the different parts of it with this interference gold paint, just to pick out those brighter spots. And I think that will help bring and emphasize certain elements on this miniature in gold without doing too much. So I'm just gonna pick out some dots. I'm just gonna paint little dots where I think the light would kind of reflect interesting, or little strips. Just dot, 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 just a little bit of dots. It's just very sketchy. Nothing perfect. I'm not trying to be perfect here. I'm just gonna try to give the impression of gold. And it really does sharpen up that gold picks out those points super bright. And I'm just gonna do some kind of a little bit of wet brushing here just to pick out the gold on her collar a little bit, just on the edges where there isn't as much shadow reading on there, and it'll just poke and pick up on those areas just a touch. Now this stuff dries out fast, so to preserve your bristles, give your brush a rinse every time you reload up. And it's worth thinning out a little bit too. That's why I have that weird bottle of interference blue, because I pre-thinned it out in there, and it makes it easier to work with when I'm laying it on as a thin layer coat. So, but for the metallics, I like to keep it kind of thicker, so it also gives me the option of dry brushing it. And this is a really fun color to dry brush with. So that is a little bit of gold on there. Brighten it right up. Gets super highlighted, if you will, like a gold super highlight. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of this interference blue. Now this is like really thinned down. You can kind of see in the bottle it looks a little bit like milk. I'm gonna shake it up real good because it kind of settles really funny, and I think that you don't want to have it settle. You want all that pigment kind of suspended. If you want to mix it with a medium as well, this is probably a really good candidate as a way to thin it down. So yeah, you just really have to shake the what does Bob Ross say? Shake the bejesus out of it, or beat the, because he does something to his brushes, right? So you beat the tarnation out of it. That sounds like more like Yosemite Sam than Bob Ross, but I'm gonna apply some onto my wet palette here. It's really thin, super watery. That's fine. I'm cool with it. And we're gonna take that onto our brush, and you can see on the bristle, like this is what this looks like. Looks like milk white, but that's what it looks like on the brushes here. I'm gonna take that right over my whole thing, and I'm just gonna wash this over. And what it does is it gives this beautiful iridescent quality to the white, and sinks into the blue, so it reflects more blue, so it reads more intensely. So I don't know if the camera can pick that up or not, but it's just an iridescent shimmer, and that's what I want to bring onto her feathers too. It's very subtle, super subtle actually, and I think the camera's having a hard time picking this up because it's so subtle. And it's so light dependent. It's really depending on how your eyes are perceiving it. But it intensifies the blues a little bit. You can kind of see a little bit on the gold on gold. But in this thing, I think it's a little harder to capture. But it's a really magical almost quality. You know how feathers kind of have that glimmer that makes them, like, you'll look at a black feather and it's black from far away, but up close you can see these tiny flecks of light kind of coming off of it in every color. That's kind of the quality you're getting here. So if you look it up real close, let's get up close and see how much. Oh, you can get a little bit of that shimmer up there. So you can kind of see that shimmer just a little bit captured. It's not like glitter, it's not shiny, it's not metallic either. It doesn't read as metallic. It just looks like this iridescent glimmer. And that's kind of what I wanted out of this. So that is the iridescent paint. Hi, Mario! Thanks for dropping by. And yeah, I think that might be Rita. Oh, I should actually do the little details on the blue here. You know what? I think I'm gonna mix a little bit of my white with my interference paint and get that kind of shimmery tone up on there. So we'll just do a couple dots up there, messy dots. We'll clear it up with some blue, and we reshape it, kind of like when we paint the eyes. It's kind of like reshaping those little dots a little bit so that they have the right shape. So you don't have to apply them so perfectly. They're a little easier to reshape this way. And then a little opposite side dot. Boop. Boop. There we go, a little reflection. Something super simple. I think we're gonna call her done. Oh, Tony, thanks so much. Oh, I'm so glad you're able to drop by. And yeah, so Tony, if you see Tony in the Facebook chat, Tony is the one who runs our Power Rangers Heroes, or the Renegade Painters Hangouts. And Tony's been also doing some of our Netflix Hangouts where we watch Power Rangers together in Netflix Party, which has been fun. A little bit of a struggle. I think it's still in beta, so it's a struggle, but it's a fun way to like reimagine the shows. So what did we cover today? We did the jewels, and I showed you a little bit of how I highlight the gold using interference paint. I showed you the interference paint on the feathers to give that iridescent quality to them. We did some wet brushing on the Bustle and did a base coat on that. We did some sharp shadows. We talked a little bit about color harmony. We also did some hair, and I talked a little bit about like messy washes and letting it go and capturing the essence of the character without painting every detail on them. And that's what we did today. We are done. Rita Repulsa. I'm really excited to have her ready and table ready. I still have now, so this is something that I've been waiting on to dry. This is the base we worked on last week. I'm going to do a live dry brush of this. So I did a wash on it. I took a picture. It's still kind of drying today because the thing about that pumice gel I used for it, if you missed last week, I used a little bit of this golden pumice gel this to shape and create this moon base style base. Because someone asked, how do I make moon style bases? This is like a textured gel. It's really light because pumice is very light, but part of the properties of pumice is because it's so light, it absorbs a lot of moisture. It's very porous, the product. So it drinks up the washes, and it takes a long time to dry because it then has to like re-release the washes. So it took a while to dry after I washed it. But I'm going to do a quick dry brush on it now so you can see how you can approach it. So I mixed in some Underhive, I think this is the color Underhive Blue, and then I washed it with like a black wash. I just mixed some water and paint and soap to create the shadow layer on it. And then we're going to come in, I'm just going to do that same base. I'm just going to come at it and use that as my dry brush color. So I did say I was going to use these wells as my dry palette this week. Who is that base for? So this is a moon base. I haven't decided who I'm going to stick on it yet. I just wanted to experiment and make sure it look right. But this is a great base for, say, Rita. Last week, someone in the Renegade Painters group had asked me like to figure out a way to create like a moon base, I should say, for Rita and what that would look like. So I'm going to take most of the paint off on my dry brush and bring that right over here and just dry brush this up to help bring out the higher details. I might take some of the white too, actually, now that I look at it. It's not picking up quite as bright as I wanted. And I'm just gonna dry brush this with that blue, and then I'm gonna come over at it again. I think I'll do a drop of white in there. So a drop of white on my dry palette. Oop. And this is like a moon style, rocky style base if you're looking for that sort of thing. And I'm just gonna take most of that white right off. It's got some of that blue initially in it too. I'm fine with that. And I'm just gonna paint over, just dry brush that texture, and it picks up that texture pretty nice. So I'm just gonna go real heavy and just, I can be pretty uncompromising with my dry brushing on this base. The pumice gel itself, the product is the pumice stones ground up mixed with a medium, and it really just holds very well. So that's where we're doing there, and we're gonna keep mixing that up. There we are, and that's, I think the color's a little washed out on camera, but it's looking pretty good. I think that has a nice finish to it. It's got the shadows and shades, it's got the highlights picked out, and it looks pretty solid, I think. I'm just going to come at it with a little more white and see how that comes through. Yeah, there we go. You get a little bit of that cracky crevice toned here. There we are on that finishing dry brush there. Just pick that out. There we are. Looks like a moon crater. Now, Rita is ready to conquer Earth from the moon. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, my name is Teri. Please remember to, if you're a Power Rangers fan, check out our Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid Facebook group. There's a lot of fans in there talking about games, sharing photos of miniatures. The Renegade Painters group, if you're looking to kind of find inspiration, get advice, share works in progress, that is a super positive, super supportive group of people who are just happy to see other people paint miniatures and share and kind of support each other. So it's a great place for that. If you are if you're not subscribed to our Twitch channel, if you're not following us on Facebook, if you're not following us on Twitch or subscribe to our YouTube channel, absolutely do that. We make free gaming content. It's really fun and entertaining, so check those out. So you get notified when we do post new content, and we're constantly streaming and posting new stuff every week. And if you're looking for more of these painting streams, we all have all of those past streams up on the YouTube channel as well. I am Teri. Thank you again for tuning in. Remember, Renegades, remember, Rangers, play your game. Until next time, I'll see you soon.